The opposition leader, Tony Abbott, has said one of the coalition's top priorities in this term is overturning the Queensland Government's Wild Rivers legislation. The Act protects river systems that are relatively untouched by development. Wild Rivers has set off a row between the Queensland Government and the Indigenous activist Noll Pearson, who says the laws lock up land that could be used for economic development for local Aboriginal communities. Tony Abbott's taken up Noll Pearson's cause and is planning to introduce a private member's bill in the federal parliament to overturn the Queensland legislation. The Aboriginal community is divided on the issue, with some voices saying Noll Pearson's not representative. One of Mr Pearson's critics has been Murrandoo Yanner from the Carpentaria Land Council. He's been publicly supportive of the Wild Rivers legislation, and he joined me a short time ago from Brisbane. Murrandoo Yanner, what's your view on the private members bill that Tony Abbott's planning to overturn the Wild Rivers legislation?
Well, I'd like to see it. I'd like Tony Abbott to come to the lower Gulf and explain it, because at the moment what we're getting is a lot of stuff through the media, and I've seen a couple of drafts. I don't know if that's what he's actually going to put to Parliament, but the drafts aren't as damaging as is being portrayed in the media, so I'd be interested for him to come out and actually consult with us, the same thing he's accusing the Queensland Government of not having done. I'd like to see him consult with us and explain his amendments to us. So I'm inviting him out to the lower Gulf to do that.
What level of consultation has there been so far between Tony Abbott or any of his shadow team and you and other people up there?
Not much at all, pretty much non-existent, but his shadow Aboriginal Affairs Minister turned up last week out in the Gulf to have a little discussion with us, but I think it needs much more, and I think Tony Abbott himself, since he's pushing it, should come and explain it and listen to our views, particularly if he wants support for his bill.
You say you've seen some drafts and they're not as damaging as some of the speculation would have us believe. What were the drafts like? Tell us some more about that.
From the drafts I saw, and like I say, I don't know if that's the actual thing he's going to propose to Parliament, that's why it's important we speak with him, but the draft I saw is all about the principle of consent, of traditional owners giving consent. And of course, I'm a traditional owner and an Aboriginal, and I have no problem with that. It's the cornerstone of our culture, the principle of consent. So I don't have a problem with that part of the bill. But is that all that's in the bill? I need him to come and explain that.
So you can't say yet whether or not you would support his bill or not?
Well, at the moment, I don't support his bill. But if the drafts I've seen, if that's all it is, then potentially I could, but I'd like him to come out and explain to us, because, as I said, going on what he said publicly, that contradicts the amendments I've seen publicly. He's saying he's going to repeal and wipe out the whole legislation, all of Wild Rivers, and that's clearly not something I support. I think there's a lot of merit to the legislation. There's far more going for it than it has against it. But like I said, there is a lot of hysteria out there, and I think he's as responsible for that, because of the amendments I've seen, I don't know what everyone else is talking about. It's simply about the principle of consent. And if that is the case and what he's proposing, then if he can come out and explain that, that's possibly a position we would strongly support.
What do you see as the merits of the existing legislation?
The merits of the existing legislation is, firstly and primarily, I think it protects natural resources that are accessed and used by our people all the time and have been since time immemorial. It protects those, and therefore it protects a lifestyle for us. Secondly, it stops the practice that raged for decades under Joh Bjelke-Petersen and every government since, until this legislation was introduced, of uninhibited and damaging development left, right and centre. No science to it, no regulation, people putting little weirs and dams in on any river without any approval or knowledge of science, and that it blocks the pathways of fish and prawns and other animals from travelling and breeding, and it's destroying parts of our region. So it's good legislation in that sense. And also a third component is it allows for long-term sustainable economic development, not a one-hit overnight wonders. And there's also spin-off benefits, such as some of the best people able to utilise and manage natural resource management in these regions are our Aboriginal people through the Aboriginal Ranger program that it supports.
Is there any aspect of it that you're unhappy with, that you would like to see amended?
With the legislation?
With the legislation.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it was new to all of us when it started. I think the Queensland Government needs to be taken to task on many issues in it, and I'm not letting them off the hook. I'm not happy with the Queensland Government just because I support a lot of the Wild Rivers legislation. In no way indicates any support for the Queensland Government. So we will be having discussions with them in the following week or two, leaders from the lower Gulf and throughout, if they expect our continued support, because they're not doing much in our region about anything, the horrifying statistics and the living conditions out there.
On the Wild Rivers, though, can you point specifically to what you would like to see changed?
I think there are parts of it, like the principle of consent, I think you should ask and you should receive permission. I think they've excluded people from some parts of a carbon economy. I think there is an argument to be put there, and that legislation could possibly be amended as well for Tony Abbott. More importantly, the carbon stuff's on the federal level. Now, if he's serious about empowering Aboriginal people and allowing them to participate in the real economy of this country, then I suggest Tony Abbott look at strengthening or amending the Native Title Act so that native title holders and traditional owners, who may not even have native title yet, are included in the carbon economy, because at the moment, Aboriginal people who have destroyed the land and are revegetating can cash in on it better than us who've looked after pristine environments. We're being locked out of a environmental carbon economy, and quite a large, serious economy. And we wouldn't have to rely on mines or other large developers if we could be included in that economy, and rightfully so, because we're the ones who've looked after the most pristine areas. And in a way, they're rewarding bad behaviour. People who've cleared their land get paid to plant a few trees now. Us who've kept them in prime condition, the greatest contributor to reducing carbon emissions are the pristine forests in the Gulf and Cape York. Therefore, we shouldn't be excluded from that economy, those who have created the best carbon stuff out there.
Let me ask you to respond to some of Mr Abbott's concerns about the Wild Rivers legislation, which are also shared by Noll Pearson. Mr Abbott believes that the laws disempower Aboriginal people and lock up land which could be used for valuable economic opportunities. What do you say to that?
Mr Abbott, your previous amendments to the native title legislation have gone far further to doing that, in taking away our right to negotiate with mining companies for royalties and for larger slices of the wealth they take from our region. I think there's other federal reform he could do in health and other areas that would make the situation far better than us. I think if he's, like I said, if he's serious, he's got to move to the bigger picture. And I don't believe that his position is correct.
How about Noll Pearson's view that the Wild Rivers legislation represents a new wave of colonialism?
I'm not sure about that. I don't agree with that. I think principle of consent, I support Noll Yanner. Colonialism, I'm not so sure. Like I said, I'm not happy with it, though. I'm halfway to agreeing with him there in terms of the Queensland Government still isn't doing enough for our mob other than the ranger program and obviously the legislation that protects our rivers, but they've got a lot of responsibilities in our region, and far more than the Wild Rivers legislation, and they seem to be very active and vociferous about the Wild Rivers legislation, yet totally lacking in any initiative or energy to do anything else important in our communities.
You mentioned the Ranger program. The Queensland Premier Anna Bligh says, in addition to that, 100 development approvals have gone through since the laws were put in place. Are you seeing any benefits from that yet?
Not really, but we haven't applied for too many. But what activities we are up to developmental-wise in the lower Gulf, we're not currently encountering too many problems. Certainly the Queensland Government ain't out there doing too much for us in terms of major... Like I said, I mean, you could do stuff. The Queensland Government issues mining permits to mining companies. They could put a condition in those mining permits to make negotiations on employment, the economic picture, leaving some of the wealth through a royalty regime or whatever in those communities. They could make amendments tomorrow and do that. So if they're serious about having us involved in an economy in Queensland, there are existing ones that we're being totally excluded from that would make this argument irrelevant. An economy based upon wild rivers. We could have an economy and a decent slice of it on the existing economic activity occurring in the Cape and Lower Gulf right now, if the Queensland Government has the kahunas, the courage, to come out and make those amendments. And likewise with Tony Abbott at a federal level. What's also confusing, I guess, is Peter Beattie, when he first proposed this in 2005 into the Queensland Parliament, the Liberal Party of Queensland supported it unanimously. So I'm a bit confused why he's suddenly turned around now opposing it. That makes me quite suspicious about his motives, and if he wants to dispel those suspicions, like I said, he should come and sit down and talk to us and actually consult the very thing he's accusing the Queensland Government of not having done.
What do you make of the inquiry that the federal Labor government is planning to hold into the Queensland legislation?
I think that could be a good thing. It would allow a lot more views to be expressed than have been heard previously. And it could result, because I believe a lot of Aboriginal leaders with the brains and initiative will tell that inquiry that, look, this is a small issue. You should be looking at the larger picture of reforming the Native Title Act, you know, the legal acts that currently have our lot in jail too much and incarcerated, you know, by a higher percentage than it should be. The health reforms needed at a federal level. There's a lot more they could be doing.
You've been quoted as saying there's a simmering resentment about Noll Pearson among Aboriginal Australians and it's slowly coming to the boil. What does that mean?
What it means, I think, is John Howard in his day, and it's been followed on a little bit by Rudd, and it's not only Noll, but John Howard had chosen certain people that he would listen to, and he refused to consult in any manner with Aboriginal people. Obviously, the intervention by Abbott, Abbott supported it with Howard, is a good example of that. They just imposed that into Northern Territory without any consultation whatsoever. So, you know, you've got to practice what you preach, I guess.
So what's that got to do with simmering resentment towards Noll Pearson?
Well, Noel's one of the people, he's spoken to that without speaking to any of the rest of us, and Noel's position should be, well, I'm not the only one, you need to go and see others. So Noel, at that stage, was a part of the problem, but I guess I want to sit down and talk with Noel soon, and I guess we're going to do that in the next few days. So whilst I've said that, probably I don't want to kick him around too much right now, because hopefully we can resolve it.
Do you feel that your relationship's at the point where it can be resolved? Because those were pretty harsh words that I read out that you've been quoted as saying.
Oh, that's the velvet glove when you know me. I haven't brought out the knuckle dusters.
You say, you know, Noll Pearson's had the ear of people. Isn't that just his good luck and good, I guess, strategy if he's been able to capture that sort of attention?
No, I think, and it's not all Noel, I think it's been an intentional ploy by Howard and by others to isolate the rest of the leadership in this country, and that is why Aboriginal Australia is upset. So it's as much with Abbott and the government as it is with Noel. Maybe Noel was used in that, I don't know. We've got to talk about that. But certainly he didn't create that. Governments wanted that, and he allowed that to happen. But it's Howard who started, and then Rudd has followed it. You know, Warren Mundine's another one. Warren pretended to speak for all of us. Warren has no mandate from Aboriginal Australia. He's elected by a bunch of white fellas in the Labor Party. He's not elected by us in any field in Aboriginal Australia. So I think the whole message we're trying to get out there to Abbott and others, even in Queensland, they've got a habit of doing that is, whoa, there's others out here of us, and if you don't start talking to us, you're only going to talk to one or two. We're going to have a go at that one or two, plus you who are doing it.
We've seen tensions between you and others in the Aboriginal community with Noll Pearson. We've got Noll Pearson versus the Queensland Government, Noll Pearson versus the Wilderness Society. We've got Tony Abbott versus the federal government. We've now got the federal government inquiring into the Queensland Government. Is this dispute really about the merits of the policy, or is it about politics and personalities who don't get on?
I think more than that. I think there's a bit of Machiavellian nastiness going on. I believe Tony Abbott may have a secret agenda. I believe this, my personal suspicions are this may be a ploy to divide the Labor Party and the Greens and help increase the coalition's position. That's my personal view, and nothing I've seen so far dispels that.
Murrandoo Yanner, thank you very much for making time to come and speak to us tonight.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.